Welcome to the Parent's Guide to Criterion versus Norm Reference Assessments. Have you ever received a score report from your child and had trouble understanding it? It may tell you that your student got 12 out of 20 questions correct on a test, and tell you that your student is proficient and has a percentile rank of 78, which puts them ahead of their peers. This can be very confusing, and for that reason, we're going to go through the difference between Criterion and Norm Reference Assessments to help make a little more sense of these various reports. The term norm referenced and criterion reference refer to score interpretations. Most tests can actually be interpreted in both ways, but they're usually designed and validated for only one or the other. So the traditional shorthand usage of saying norm referenced just means that it is the primarily intended interpretation. Today we're going to discuss the purpose of criterion and norm reference assessments. We'll compare some key differences about them, as both are useful, and then we'll discuss how to interpret assessment results for each type of test. We're going to start with criterion referenced assessments. These assessments measure a student's performance, knowledge, or skills based on a predetermined standard, learning goal, or other criterion. In other words, they'll tell you what your student knows and what they don't. Many of these tests have a cut score that categorizes results into basic, proficient, and advanced. And lastly, these criterion referenced assessments do not compare to another student. They are just looking at individual performance and mastery of a skill or standard. The purpose of these determines whether or not your student has achieved specific skills or concept mastery, and it can help determine what they know before instruction begins as well as after they've finished. And the content measures those specific skills designated by a curriculum, usually from the teacher or a curriculum expert or the district, and they're expressed as an instructional objective or standard. And the scores are interpreted as either they're proficient, meeting the standard, or below standard. For example, thinking of a driving test, these tests are used to determine if a person has mastered the skills required to drive on the road safely. They don't rate drivers against one another. All drivers have the potential to master these skills and get their license. You might also think of a vocabulary test. In these assessments, you'll know exactly which questions and standards the student knows and which ones they don't. It doesn't compare to the other students who took the test, just the individual student's mastery. Looking at norm reference assessments, these assessments measure a student's performance compared to the performance of students on the same assessment. They are more large scale, so they have a norm group, or a group of students in which the scores are compared, which can be thousands of students across the country taking the same assessment, possibly at the same time. Scoring for these is usually on a bell curve and described as though a percentile rank. Because of the way of this scoring, it doesn't provide information on the mastery of content, just a comparison. The purpose of these is to rank each student with respect to their achievement in broad areas and to discriminate between high and low achievers. These tests are usually sampled from a variety of textbooks, syllabi, and the judgment of curriculum experts, and the scores are usually compared with other examinees and expressed as a percentile, grade equivalent score, or STAY9, and reported for broad skill areas, although you can have some norm reference interpretation for students for individual skills. These we see as tests such as the ACT, the SAT, and other standardized tests. Now we'll discuss how to interpret the results. For example, if your student takes a 10-question music test and they get 7 of the 10 correct, their raw score is a 7, and we would convert that raw score into a percent score by taking a ratio of 7 to 10 and giving them a percent score of 70. Many times, teachers or school have set cutoff scores to determine if a student is excelling, proficient, approaching mastery, or below proficiency, which will help them address the areas of instruction that need to be revisited in which standards are mastered. Norm reference assessments are a little confusing at first. These assessments are meant to compare your performance to the performance of the group. Because of this, scoring is often expressed as a percentile and is based on a bell curve. So if you receive a score of 70th percentile, this does not mean that you scored 70% of the questions correctly. It means that you scored 70%. That means that you scored the same or better than 70% of the norm group. Here you see an example of a bell curve with the percentile ranks. As you can see, scores from the 16th to the 84th percentile on this curve are within the average range. The 2nd percentile to the 16th percentile is below average, and anything below the 2nd percentile is significantly below average. In conclusion, the criterion reference assessment tests what an individual student has mastered and is expressed as a raw score percent, and a norm reference assessment compares an individual performance to the group's performance and is expressed as a percentile rank through a bell curve. I hope you feel more confident in your understanding of your students' future grading reports. Thank you, and if you have any questions, the references are listed here.